Welcome to Section 2.9 of the Foreclosure Prevention class, Preparing Current and Crisis Budgets. A current budget. What you want to do is create a current budget by documenting all the monthly income expenses. Seems pretty straightforward, right? We do that all the time. Every penny spent should be documented. Checking account bank statements are useful reference tools. And let me reiterate that, because most times people aren't quite sure where they're spending their money. So using the bank account to kind of support the information they tell you is really going to be, is you doing your due diligence and going through and saying, oh wow, you go to Starbucks 3 times a week. Well, they didn't include Starbucks in their budget, so you want to make sure you're counting that. Make sure you're looking at those frequent Walmart trips, or usually it's groceries where people are, or eating out where people don't really calculate the income accurately. So definitely use the bank statements to help you when creating a current budget. Now you're going to look at income, employment, overtime, child support, everything we talked about in the previous section. Pension, public benefits, any kind of interest or dividend they might get, a trust payment, royalties, rents, any type of income you want to include in your current budget, as well as expenses. Now in the budget, you're actually going to look at utilities, groceries, childcare, things we didn't include in the ratios, you want to include in the budget, because you want to get a realistic picture of how much they're actually bringing home, how much they have left over at the end of the day. So make sure you include haircuts, clothing, eating out, all that other stuff in addition to what's on the credit report. Medical bills, phone bills, cell phones especially, gas, back and forth to work, oil changes, everything. Make sure you include that in the budget. Now the crisis budget is going to be a little different, because the crisis budget really should be a short-term fix for hopefully what should be a short-term situation. So it's not the type of budget that they're going to live on forever. It's just something they need to get through. The crisis budget is a revised budget which focuses only on the client's indispensable and necessary expenditures. So it goes back to that needs versus wants. On the crisis budget, we're only including the needs. We're not including the wants. Typically, these are food, housing, medical needs, if they have regular prescriptions that they have to have, utilities, transportation, that sort of thing. And many lenders have standards set for acceptable spending. How do we create a crisis budget? Well, the first thing we want to do is determine the net income. Now remember, in previous sections we were looking at gross income, because we were looking at ratios. Now we're looking at net income. What do they actually bring home? We've got an example. In this example, the counselor reviews pay stubs and other supporting documentation with the client and determines that their net family income is $2,200 a month. And this is all in your reading materials. So the second step is determine what the expenses are. And as we can see here, these are the expenses that the client says they have. And you can see that the expenses are $3,185. This is a little bit higher than the net income, isn't it? Absolutely. The third step is let's calculate their surplus or their deficit. So again, in this case, since we've got $2,200 of income minus $3,185 of expenses, we're going to come up with a deficit of $985. So they're going to be short $985 every month. They can't live off that. And that's based on their current budget. So these are the steps we take to create a crisis budget. Step 4 is we go back to this budget and we see how we can reevaluate, reduce, and eliminate some spending. And some examples are, let's say with the credit cards, you may be able to get them consolidated into a lower monthly payment. Let's say we can reduce them to $75 a month versus the $175 we were doing before. This can be done in a few ways. You may be able to call the credit card companies and request a short-term kind of forbearance with the credit card. You can see if they can reduce the interest rate for you. You can shop around if the credit's so good for another credit card that may have a lower interest rate and transfer the balance. You can also look at a debt management program, or DMP, where they combine everything into one payment basically, and the DMP company pays the creditor, gets the creditor to agree to less payment, and pays the creditor on the homeowner's behalf, and that way the homeowner's just making the one payment. Sometimes it's a little easier. They can manage it a little better if they have less, especially if you have a client who has a whole lot of credit cards. This may be a way to go. Keep in mind, though, that you want to make sure that the client picks their own DMP unless you have DMP in-house, because if there's a problem, whoever you refer them to is a reflection of you. So be careful with that. If you've got several agencies that you refer to, and again, HUD wants to make sure you're referring at least 3, then make sure, check the Better Business Bureau, make sure they're a reputable company, that sort of thing. With student loans, they may be able to apply for forbearance. Usually in times of hardship like this, student loan companies will allow you to do that, and they'll do it usually for 12 months at a time. So then you can take out that whole payment. Groceries, you want to look at it. Again, when I work with my clients with groceries, I break it down further than just how much do you spend each month. I go by week, because more people can get a better idea of their sense of spending if you do it weekly. And I will usually ask them, what do you have for breakfast most days? Do you eat at home? Do you stop at McDonald's or someplace on your way to work? If so, how much is that? Do you give money to your kids for breakfast at school? If so, how much is that? And then I calculate that weekly times 52 weeks. It gives me annual divided by 12 months. So that's how I get, and I go lunch, I do dinner, and then I do weekends, because weekend spending is very different from weekday spending. If they've got kids, they may be going to games, they may be traveling, so gas expenses are a little higher. Food expenses may be a little higher because they're eating out. So you want to make sure you break that down with them. Oftentimes, like I said, they just don't know they're spending that much. And then clothing, not really a necessity during a crisis. So that can usually be eliminated. Gas, usually you can look at ways of reducing your gas and electric. You can talk to your utility company maybe and get an equal payment plan. So those are just some ideas of getting that debt reduced. Water, same thing. Landline, oftentimes a landline is not necessary. So many people have cell phones now, so that may be a way of reducing that payment. And if you're talking about cell phones, maybe they can opt just for a landline and not have a cell phone, or go to a prepaid service that may be much less expensive than a regular, one of the big Verizon, Sprint, AT&T, which have the really expensive monthly plans. But keep in mind, if they've recently started one, they may have a big penalty to pay in order to reduce. But you can also call them and tell them, look, we're in a hardship. Is there any way they can work with you? And see what they say. Internet may be an unnecessary spending. You may be able to eliminate that. Again, if they have kids, then maybe not, because maybe that's they have to do schoolwork online to research information online. But keep in mind, you've got a public library, which oftentimes has computers that people can use. And it doesn't mean they're getting rid of their internet forever. This just may be a short-term solution to get them through this crisis. Same with cable, maybe a short-term solution. Let them do Redbox for a couple times. Or oftentimes if you call your cable company and let them know you have a hardship, they may have a really inexpensive plan. I've seen that happen on more than one occasion, where they tell you when they sell you the plan, the base plan is, let's say, $50 a month. But if you've already got them, they may have a $29 plan that they don't advertise, but it's just for these instances. So check with them, see what they have. Entertainment, again, not a necessity, so that's something you may be able to eliminate during the short-term crisis, as well as eating out. So now let's look and see what we do. So then we finalize our crisis budget. The budget is created by incorporating the changes from step 4 into our regular budget. So then we see now what we're left with. Now our total budget is $1,980. We recalculate our surplus or our deficit, and in this case, the $2,200 minus $1,980 gives us $220 left over at the end of the month, instead of owing $985. And so you're helping your homeowner see that they can still maintain while they're going through this crisis. They just have to make some adjustments. Now, what items should not be included in a crisis budget, you think? I'm just going to let you think about that for just a little bit. Now, let's do an activity. If you go in your book on page 2, there is a sample crisis budget or sample budget, and we want you to help create a crisis budget for your client. Now, this is just for your information, so you may want to go to the reading material and look over the sample that we just went over together and use that to help guide you. But go ahead and fill that in and just have that for your own reference and information, all right? All right, that's the end of section 2.9. Thank you. We're done.